one of the buzzwords of the minute really is this critical race theory thing, and a lot of people might not know much about it. They might have heard something about it.
Yeah.
Do you want to? Can we start with like I guess your understanding of what that means and a definition almost before we
Yeah.
talk about it?
Yeah. I don't blame people for not knowing what it is or being confused by it. It's a very complex ideology. And oftentimes, at a very basic level, myself and many others will explain it as this: it's basically the concept of, if people are familiar with more sociology, maybe basically it's the idea there's a conflict theory, that society is made up of people who are in conflict with each other. And it's been that way since the beginning of the time. And that's borrowed from a Marxist thinking. So Marx was one who developed the conflict theory. And it's the idea that in the past, they'll say that you had the bourgeoisie versus the proletariat.
Mm-hmm.
So you have the oppressor and the oppressed, the privileged versus the
Mm-hmm.
underprivileged. So it could be, initially it was, again, strictly just economical, but now it's more cultural, where it is between men and women. Again, men being the oppressor, women being the oppressed,
Right. Mm-hmm.
white people and black people, immigrants versus citizen, cisgender versus transgender, um, Christian versus Muslim, and there is a Christian privilege that people need to be aware of. I think it will shape. I think in the future it will become more prominent if we continue with this critical race theory rhetoric, or just embracing it more. We'll get there. But anyway, that's at a very basic level what it is. More than that, though, critical race theory particularly is focused on Black people, right? So there's critical theory, um, which it deals with all the other kinds of oppressor versus the oppressed
Mm-hmm.
thinking. Critical race theory, though, is very particular in saying that Black people are oppressed in the whole world, but especially in the Western culture, in that Western society was built by white people, or white men particularly, for white men.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Therefore, it will never ever change. So, especially legally, what we believe to be because right now, so what we would call liberal democracy, or
Mm-hmm.
which is not so much the ideology. I don't mean
Yeah.
leftism. I just
Yeah.
mean democracy, right? So
Yeah.
Canada, America, Britain, um, you have this, you have equality you have equality of law, that we are all equal under the law. They would say that that sounds great, but that's colorblind
Mm-hmm.
ideology, in that in of itself is racist. And because it was shaped that way and is framed that way to make
Mm.
Black people believe.
Yeah, like it's ignorant of circumstances and history and all that stuff.
Exactly, right? But this system is based on individualism that from the very beginning has helped white people and oppressed Black people. And that would never change unless we abolish the system completely, to have an anti-racist system, which
Mm-hmm.
really is a more race conscious socialism, essentially, is what it comes down to, where you then produce equality of outcome,
Mm.
right? So the whole goal here is to produce equality of outcome for Black people, and perhaps even in many cases to have Black people being wealthier or being more privileged
Mm.
than white people. But that's generally what critical race theory is, and they will oftentimes push that agenda through what we call standpoint epistemology, or legal storytelling, which basically means that, as we mentioned earlier about lived experiences,
Mm-hmm.
that Black people, when it comes to understanding oppression and racism, they are right because they have the epistemology, they have the knowledge of understanding these issues based on their experiences with racism. So the way to push that is through legal storytelling, which comes from, so critical race theory comes from critical legal studies, which came out of critical theory. It might be confusing.
Yeah.
I'm trying to simplify
No,
it
no,
all.
it's you're doing a good job so far.
Okay. Oh, I'm very grateful. Okay. So it comes from a legal aspect, where it's really just to explain that the law, after the civil rights movement, wasn't enough. That the equality of sorry, the equality under the law wasn't enough. They wanted to produce equality of outcome. So
Right.
for that to happen, they have to say, no, the entire legal system is actually oppressive towards Black people. So they
Mm.
came up with this term called legal storytelling, which basically means that um, that that you want to tell a story of, a narrative for for Black people as a way, as the basis for uh um making an argument for what they would consider justice,
Mm.
um
That
instead of
is
using
that.
facts and reason
Mm.
and a colorblind system. You need to use a Black person's lived experiences as very evidence for what
Right.
they're saying being true.
Mm. Yeah, so it's, I mean, I guess you mentioned about this equality of outcome idea, and that comes into ideologies and ideas like affirmative action and that kind of stuff. I guess it's trying to, they would see it as trying to level the playing field or right the
Yes,
wrongs of the past. And
exactly,
what,
exactly.
from a devil's advocate perspective, what would be the, I guess, the optimistic end goal that someone who subscribes to this theory would think is like, where is it heading? What does an ideal society or or a perfected society look like to someone that's trying to advance this theory or use this theory to get that way?
Yeah, I'm grateful that you use an ideal society, because it really is a pursuit of a utopia.
Hmm.
And because of its Marxist roots, it does pursue a utopia, a world
Right.
essentially without injustice, a world without wrong think,
Hmm.
essentially. Nevertheless, I suppose it goes back to what I was saying earlier, in that their ideal society is equality of outcome. Um, and and in that way, many people are sincere. They really believe true
Yeah.
justice is when everybody has the same share. But of course, that's not justice. But many people have been taught to believe that when everybody has the same property,
Hmm.
right? And in doing so, again, they have the Marxist thinking that who you are as a person is shaped by what you have. That's not true, of course, but many people are sincere in thinking that, well, if we can just have a world where you have equality of outcome, where everyone has the same thing, the same kind of salary, the same
Yeah.
kind of experiences for the most part, then that's justice. But of course, that's wrong. Not only is it wrong, it's impossible. It can never happen. We are not we, we are we are people with different desires, different
Mm.
skills, different um just we're just different in
Yeah.
so many
Choices.
ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, different choices. As Thomas Sowell, who's one of my heroes, says, even in the same household, two children will have different lives.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's for same household, two people.
Hmm.
Imagine billions of people. It's impossible. It will never happen. That's why within communism and socialist nations, you never they never achieve what they claim they want to achieve. Not a single one. Not China, not communist, not the Soviet Union, not Venezuela for sure, not Cuba. It never works because it's impossible. At
Mm.
the end, people love power, and if you give
Right.
people power, they will always oppress other people.
Mm.
So what we should be pursuing is equality under the law and not equality of outcome.
Yeah, and I guess it runs contrary. I would love to have a Christian socialist on the show to talk about their perspective on these issues, but to me, it runs contrary to how I see, I guess, humanity having a fallen, sinful nature. And utopia is impossible by man's means and works because there'll always be that fallen nature. People will always take advantage, like you said. People, like, the power corrupts, and people there will, any socialist and communist um nation or country, state, whatever you want to call it, has
Mhm.
always ended up, I guess, as a dictatorship. And that is almost, funnily enough, the opposite of what Marx, I guess, envisioned in
Yeah,
terms of the falling away of the state and the
yeah,
communist utopia where everyone's equal and takes, what they need and works hard. So that, to me, it is neglectful of the sinful nature of man. And I wouldn't expect a non-Christian necessarily to subscribe to that, but I think, especially as a Christian, we should be acutely aware of our fallen sinful nature because it's the very first book in the Bible, the very first chapter of the Bible. um
exactly.
And yeah, so I was trying to remember where I was going to go with that, but basically, yeah, I was enlightened by Jordan Peterson's discussions of some of these topics, especially with reference to Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago, where he said that basically in the Soviet Union, it got down to they were trying to split hairs almost in terms of finding the oppression. The first they came for the obvious, the wealthy, and then it became like the landowners, and then it became the business owners, the people that had more, and they kind of went further and further down, because you'll always find a demographic or you'll find somewhere in some way that you're oppressing someone else or above someone else. Exactly. So that that's where I guess I can see things like this heading in that direction, where is anyone not oppressed really when you think about it? And you may think that it's working for your benefit in some ways, but then they might call you privileged because you have different ideologies or subscribe different ways than they do.
Exactly. And that's a great point. If everyone is oppressed, which is essentially what critical race theory, I mean, they claim if you're white, you're not oppressed, but really what they really mean is if you're a white man, you're not oppressed. And even then, it's if you are a white cisgender man. And then so it at some point becomes so small, but nevertheless, it's a great point, because if everyone is oppressed, then everyone is an oppressor, right? That's what it will naturally come down to. And it's especially important for Black people, because what's happening through, I always struggle to say this word, so I have to slow down and say it, what's happening through intersectionality, I think I nailed it.
Yeah. Exactly.
What that essentially says is Black men are also oppressors against Black women. Right? And Black Lives Matter has completely embraced that, which is why they are led primarily by women, which is why they are very clear in being against the nuclear family. And they actually mention that that women should be, they support primarily single parent households led by women. I wouldn't say that any white person today is responsible for anything unless they have individually caused some to be victims of racism.
So you would kind of disagree with this thing of, I guess, all white people are responsible and have to hold their hands up?
Not even close. So for one, for example, just using America, because that's more dominant culture. During slavery, for example, you had only roughly in all of America 2% of white Americans owned slaves. So that's 2%, which means that 98% were not. Now, many more were racist and were approving of slavery, but nevertheless, they were not themselves the ones who were owning slaves. And then, so then naturally, not their descendants are going to be also pretty minimal, compared to the entire population. And even those people should not be at all blamed for what their forefathers did. Because my father, never mind my forefather, my father himself was a horrible man. And yet no one can blame me for his sins against my mom, right? So if even my own father, I should be blamed for that, then why should a white person be blamed for what some of their forefathers did? Especially when also in America, you also had roughly 25% of Black Americans in the South owned slaves. Black Americans today who descend from, so for example, Daryl from I can't think right now. Sorry, Daryl from the
just
podcast.
Thinking,
He's mentioned that his forefathers, one of them owned slaves. He shouldn't be blamed for that at all, nor should he be forced to have some kind of a corporate guilt for that.
Right.
So what I would say is, yes, white people should, if they're able to, right, should do something to help out people today. However, not because they're white, but because they're human. And especially if they're Christian, they are called to help out vulnerable people, but helping them out in a biblical fashion, not in the way the culture calls us to. White guilt, I don't want anyone to have white guilt. Please. That has been destructive. White people feeling bad about themselves and then wanting to rid themselves of guilt has destroyed a number of good things for Black people. That's not good. We just, white people, Black people, everybody should want to love their neighbor, regardless of their skin color. So people shouldn't see this as a Black and white issue. literally and figuratively,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
People should see it as just helping our neighbors, because it's not just Black people who are struggling, it's all people who are struggling, right?
Yeah.
But remember, people are not struggling today because they're Black, they're struggling because of certain circumstances. So I want to be just as willing to help out a white person as I would want to help out a Black person. Now, because of my experiences, I do have naturally a passion, and it's okay for a white person to have a special kind of compassion and or passion in general
Yeah.
for a Black person. That's okay, but they shouldn't feel as if they need to do so because they are white. They
Mm.
should feel as if they feel like they need to, it should be because God has given them a
Yeah.
a special commission, a special desire to help out Black people. But again, but not because they are white, but because it's just their God-given duty that God has given,
Mm.
to them.
And this idea of systemic racism, would you say that that exists in some form, in your opinion?
No,
Like that
I'm
system is
probably
set.
shocking.
Yeah, like the system is set up. I guess this is the common. No, I guess you could say it's common cultural knowledge these days, in inverted commas, that systemic racism exists, and the system is set up to oppress Black people.
Uh,
You talked a little bit, I guess, about individually or guilty or feeling guilty and those kind of things, but systemically, you would say that doesn't exist then.
No, I wouldn't say so. Systemic racism is uniquely, at least as people mean it today, is uniquely a critical race theory concept, which goes back to what I was saying before,
Right.
that the system is built by white men for white people. Therefore, what we think is actually equality is oppression against Black people. Well, that's wrong.
Mm.
So for example, the civil rights movement, which is why today you have a lot of critical race theorists who essentially call Martin Luther King a racist because
Wow.
his color. Yeah, in the book, How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi, he is careful enough not to be outright in saying so, but pretty clearly implies that MLK's colorblind. Um, well, he does say that colorblind ideology is racist,
Hmm.
but he doesn't attach that to Martin Luther King Jr. But when he does talk about Martin Luther King Jr., he does imply that he is a racist. Um, but anyway, what he did is he never said abolish the system. He
Hmm.
said let's actually live up to the dream, the
Right.
American dream. Let's live. He would reference
Hmm.
Abraham Lincoln and the founding fathers to say, no, 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 no.
Yeah.
You guys have given us a bad check. You have not
We're
lived
here to
up.
cash the check. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly.
Mm.
Um, so so and that's the idea there. So that's not a system. So if so, according to Martin Luther King Jr., and really just I would say, if we're being honest with looking at either it's the British system, the Canadian system, or the American system, it is not inherently racist. It's not, right. The system itself isn't racist. Now there are some policies
Right.
that were racist, but as it stands today, and it's general laws. It's not racist at all. And but remember, critical race theory, it doesn't it so some today when they think of systemic racism, they might think, well, there's some laws today that are racist. I was asking, well, name one. Um, I laugh as I
Mm.
mentioned this, but I mentioned this in an article that I haven't found, not a single person today. I've been writing about this stuff for 5 years. Not a single person has been able to give me a single law that would be racist. And I say it boldly because I know they can't. And there was
Yeah.
one person who said, "Oh, well, just give me a week. I'll get it for you." Well, hold on. I thought to myself, if you have to wait for, if you look around for a week before you can prove me wrong, that already tells me you don't know yourself. You're just
Yeah.
hoping you just look around and
You
find it.
base your ideas on something that you don't know much about.
Exactly. Now
Yeah.
it's been more than a week. That person hasn't gotten back to me. But I mentioned that to say there is no law today or policy today that's racist against Black people. But critical race theory, what it says is the entire system itself, by framing itself as being colorblind or as
Yeah.
being objectively, good for all
Yeah.
people, really isn't. It's basically just some
Mm.
kind of a manipulation tactic.